The Christmas tree lights twinkled mockingly as I sat in the corner of the Andersons' lavish living room, watching my mother-in-law, Victoria, hold court. 5 years of marriage to her son Michael, and she still treated me like an intruder who had somehow conned her precious boy into marriage. "Catherine, darling." Victoria's voice dripped with false sweetness. "Those earrings must be new. Michael's been so generous lately, hasn't he?" I touched the simple pearl studs I'd bought myself last month with profits from my latest investment. "Actually, you know, Margaret," Victoria turned to her friend, deliberately cutting me off. "When Michael was at Princeton, all the society girls were after him. The Vanderbilt girl was particularly keen." She shot me a pointed look. "But somehow he ended up with—" Well, I took a slow sip of wine, remembering the day I'd first met Michael. Not at some society function as Victoria liked to imagine, but in the financial district, where I was closing my 3rd successful property deal of the year. He'd been impressed by my knowledge of market trends, not my pedigree, but Victoria had her own version of reality. "Mother," Michael warned from across the room, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd grown increasingly passive in these situations, choosing peace over confrontation. The evening continued its downward spiral as Victoria orchestrated her annual Christmas dinner. 20 guests, all carefully selected to remind me of my questionable background. Old money families, business dynasties, and me, the daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse who had worked her way through business school. "Remember last year's disaster?" Victoria stage whispered to her friend Helen. "Catherine tried to suggest we invest in some startup. Can you imagine? As if she understands how our kind of money works." That disaster was now a multi-million-dollar tech company. I'd made the investment privately after Victoria had shot down my suggestion at the family meeting. The return had been enough to buy 3 premium properties in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. Not that anyone at this dinner knew that. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, checking my phone. A message from my assistant, Amanda. "Urgent news about the Anderson property. Need your decision." I typed back quickly. "Hold for now. We'll contact later." When I returned, Victoria was in full swing, regaling her guests with stories of Michael's childhood. "Remember when you wanted to start that silly computer company, darling? Thank goodness, Daddy stepped in and got you that position at the firm instead." Michael shifted uncomfortably. The silly computer company had been his dream. His father had crushed it, insisting he take a respectable job at the family's investment firm. Now he spent his days managing other people's money while his own entrepreneurial spirit slowly died. "Speaking of investments," Victoria continued, her voice sharp, "I heard the most interesting rumor about that building on 5th Avenue. The one that mysterious investor bought last month. Apparently, they paid cash." She stared directly at me. "But something about tonight. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was years of accumulated frustration, made me speak up. Actually, the market's quite robust if you know where to look," I said calmly. "Just last month, a private investor acquired the entire Carlton building portfolio. Quite a shrewd move, really." Victoria's eyes narrowed. The Carlton portfolio had been something her husband had tried to acquire for years. What she didn't know was that I had outbid him through one of my shell companies. "Well," she said sharply, "some of us prefer legitimate business dealings. Not everyone can afford to throw money around without explanation." The room temperature seemed to drop. Michael stared into his wine glass, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "What exactly are you implying, Victoria?" I asked quietly. She stood, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I'm implying, dear, that none of us are fool enough to believe you could afford property on 5th Avenue on your own. So either my son has been foolishly giving you access to his accounts, or—" She let the accusation hang in the air. "Mother," Michael started, but she waved him off. "No, it's time someone said it. We've all been too polite for too long." Victoria's voice rose. "You show up from nowhere, marry my son, and suddenly, you're buying premium real estate. Do you think we're idiots?" The room was silent, except for the gentle tinkling of ice in nervous guests' glasses. "Let's be clear," Victoria continued, her voice trembling with anger. "We all know what you are. A gold digger who got lucky with my son. But if you think you can use his money to play real estate baron, gold digger." The word exploded from her like a weapon, echoing off the expensive wallpaper. "That's what you are, isn't it? Admit it." Just then, the doorbell rang. Victoria's housekeeper hurried to answer it, probably grateful for the interruption. My assistant Amanda walked in, calm and professional in her tailored suit. She carried a leather portfolio and wore the slight smile I recognized from our biggest deals. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "Mrs. Anderson, I have some documents that require immediate attention." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "Whatever it is can wait. We're having a family dinner." "I'm afraid it can't wait," Amanda continued smoothly. "Your mortgage payment is late again, as your lender requires notification." "My mortgage?" Victoria's face flushed. "What are you talking about?" "Our mortgage is with First National." "Was with First National," Amanda corrected, opening her portfolio. "The loan was purchased last year by Summit Holdings." She paused, her eyes meeting mine. "Along with most of your family's outstanding debts." The room went completely silent. Even the ice stopped tinkling. "Summit Holdings?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "But that's one of my companies," I finished quietly. "Along with the Shell Corporation that owns the Fifth Avenue building you mentioned earlier, and the Carlton portfolio, and about 30 other premium properties in the city." I stood, smoothing my dress. "I never touched Michael's money, Victoria. I never needed to. While you were all laughing at my little side business, I was building an empire. One property at a time. With my own money, my own sweat, and my own intelligence." Victoria's legs seemed to give out, and she sank back into her chair. The truth was finally hitting her. All those buildings she'd coveted, all those mysterious deals she'd gossiped about, they were all mine. "The mortgage," she began, "is due tomorrow," Amanda confirmed, "along with the country club membership fees, the summer house maintenance loans, and the credit line for your recent renovation, all now held by Mrs. Catherine's companies." I picked up my purse, ready to leave. The night had gone exactly as I'd planned, though I hadn't expected Victoria to make it quite so easy. "Why?" Michael asked, speaking for the first time. "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at my husband, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have sided with your mother, assumed I was lying, cheating, gold digging?" The silence was answer enough. "Merry Christmas, Victoria," I said, heading for the door. "Amanda will help you set up a payment plan. I'd hate to have to foreclose on family property." I paused at the threshold. "Oh, and those pearl earrings you mentioned. I bought them myself, just like everything else." As I walked out into the snowy night, I could hear Victoria's world crashing down behind me. But this was just the beginning. I had plans for the Anderson family empire. Plans that would make tonight's revelation look like a holiday party game. The real power play was yet to come. The snow crunched under my heels as I walked to my car, leaving behind the sounds of chaos erupting from the Anderson mansion. Amanda fell into step beside me, her tablet already out. Should I send the full portfolio analysis to their accountant? She asked. No, I replied, watching my breath form clouds in the cold air. Let them stew for 24 hours first. Sometimes the anticipation of bad news is more effective than the news itself. As my driver pulled up in our unmarked black SUV, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. For 5 years, I'd arrived at this house in my own modest car, playing the role Victoria had cast me in, the social climbing gold digger who'd somehow trapped her precious son. Little did she know that I owned not just her mortgage, but the very ground beneath her feet. Pull up the Anderson portfolio, I instructed Amanda as we settled into the back seat. I want to review everything before tomorrow's meeting. The numbers scrolled across her tablet, a digital testament to the Anderson family's slow descent into financial mediocrity. What had once been one of the city's most powerful real estate dynasties had been gradually crumbling under Victoria's husband's mismanagement. George Anderson had spent the last decade trying to maintain appearances while hemorrhaging money on bad investments and vanity projects. Their total debt exposure, I asked, though I knew the number by heart. $47.3 million, Amanda replied. Spread across 12 different lenders. Well, formerly 12. Now all consolidated under Summit Holdings. I nodded, remembering the meticulous plan I'd set in motion 3 years ago. It had started small, buying up the Andersons' smallest loans, the ones they'd barely noticed. A credit line here, a property mortgage there. Each purchase made through a different shell company, each transaction untraceable to me. Pull up the timeline, I said. Amanda swiped through screens until she found the document we'd labeled Project Karma. It detailed every step of my systematic acquisition of Anderson debt, alongside their own failing attempts to maintain their empire. March 2022. While Victoria was mocking my little real estate business at their Easter brunch, I was purchasing their country club's mortgage through my third shell company. June 2022. As George Anderson publicly dismissed me as the gold digger at a charity gala, I was outbidding him on the Carlton portfolio through my hedge fund. September 2022. When Victoria accidentally spilled wine on my dress at her garden party, I was finalizing the purchase of their summer house loan. Send the foreclosure warnings, I instructed Amanda. One for each property, from each different holding company. Let them realize just how completely they're surrounded. Already queued up, she confirmed. They'll receive the first batch tomorrow morning. What about Michael? Michael. My husband. The man who'd never quite found the courage to stand up to his mother. Who'd watched silently tonight as Victoria spewed her venom, just as he'd done countless times before. He'll get the full disclosure packet at his office tomorrow, I said, including the prenup analysis. That had been Victoria's crowning achievement, the prenuptial agreement she'd forced Michael to present me with before our wedding. I'd signed it without argument, much to her suspicious surprise. What she hadn't realized was that I'd already been worth more than their entire family at that point. Speaking of Michael, Amanda said carefully, he's been trying to access the Anderson Investment Group's main accounts for the past hour. I smiled. He's finally figured out he can't get in. Yes, the system locked him out at 9 p.m., exactly as planned. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. While Victoria had been busy watching me for signs of gold digging, she'd missed the real threat. Over the past year, I'd systematically gained control of their investment group's digital infrastructure through a series of seemingly unrelated AT contracts. What's our current position in Anderson Industries? I asked. Amanda pulled up another screen. Through various funds and holdings, we now control 48% of their public shares. Another 3%, and we'll have majority control. I watched the city lights blur past the car window, remembering the day I'd first met the Andersons. I'd already been successful, already building my empire in secret. But something about their arrogance, their casual cruelty wrapped in social pleasantries, had triggered a desire to teach them a lesson. "Send me the guest list from tonight," I said. "Already done. Interesting note. 3 of the couples present are also heavily leveraged with loans we've acquired." Perfect. The Andersons' social circle was about to discover that their financial foundations were as shaky as their moral ones. "What about the evidence file?" I asked. Amanda patted her briefcase. "All here. Every email, every memo, every questionable transaction George Anderson has authorized over the past decade. Enough documentation to interest both the SEC and the district attorney's office. I discovered George's creative accounting practices 2 years ago. Rather than expose him immediately, I carefully documented everything while buying up his debt. Sometimes the best weapon is simply knowing when not to use it." The car pulled up to my private office building, not the modest space where I met clients, but the penthouse suite where I actually ran my empire. As we rode the private elevator, Amanda updated me on the night's market movements. The Asian markets are responding to our positions exactly as predicted. By morning, Anderson Industries stock will be down 3%. Just enough to panic their board members, but not enough to trigger any regulatory alerts. The pieces were all in place. "What about Victoria's pet project?" I asked as we entered my office. Amanda pulled up another file. "The Anderson Foundation? Their annual gala is scheduled for next week. All the old money families will be there, as usual." "Perfect timing," I said, settling behind my desk. "Have our PR team ready. When Victoria realizes she can't make the donation she's already promised, the social embarrassment will be—" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Educational." I spent the next 2 hours reviewing documents and signing authorizations. By morning, the Andersons would face a coordinated assault on every front: financial, social, and legal. Each move had been planned months in advance, every contingency accounted for. "Should I activate Phase 2? Amanda asked as she prepared to leave. I thought about Victoria's face when she called me a gold digger, about Michael's silence, about 5 years of subtle insults and social snubs. "Yes," I said. "It's time they learned what real power looks like." As Amanda left, I pulled up the real estate listings on my private server. The Anderson Mansion, their summer house, their beloved country club. I owned it all now, one way or another. But property was just the beginning. My phone buzzed. Michael, calling for the 3rd time tonight. I let it go to voicemail, just as I had the previous calls. He'd had his answers soon enough. Tomorrow, the Andersons would wake up to find their world crumbling. Their accounts frozen, their properties in jeopardy, their social standing teetering on the brink. But that was just the opening move. I opened my safe and pulled out a single file labeled Anderson Legacy. Inside was the document I'd been saving for the perfect moment. Proof that the Anderson fortune had been built on a lie 3 generations ago. Victoria's precious family history was about to become very public. Very embarrassing history. "Miss Sullivan?" My security chief's voice came through the intercom. "The team is in position at all Anderson properties, as requested." "Excellent," I replied. "Maintain surveillance, but take no action until my signal." I walked to the window, looking out over the city I'd quietly come to own while playing the role of the humble daughter-in-law. Tomorrow, the masks would come off. Tomorrow, the Andersons would learn what it truly meant to lose everything. And it would all happen exactly according to plan. The Anderson Foundation Gala was in full swing, crystal chandeliers gleaming above Manhattan's elite as they sipped champagne and congratulated themselves on their generosity. Victoria Anderson stood at the center of it all, basking in what she didn't realize would be her last moment of social triumph. I watched from the mezzanine level of the Plaza Hotel's ballroom, noting how she kept glancing nervously at her phone. It had been a week since the Christmas dinner revelation, and the Andersons' world had been slowly unraveling, one thread at a time. "The SEC representatives have arrived," Amanda murmured beside me. "They're waiting in the side room as requested." "And George Anderson?" "Still trying to access the offshore accounts he thought no one knew about." She smiled slightly. "He's discovered they've all been frozen." I checked my watch. 8:45 p.m. In 15 minutes, Victoria would make her annual speech and announce the foundation's landmark donation to the city's children's hospital. A donation that, unknown to her guests, she could no longer make. Michael stood by his mother's side, his face drawn and pale. He hadn't been home since learning the truth about my empire. The last week had been a brutal education for him, discovering that his family's wealth was largely smoke and mirrors, while his gold-digger wife controlled most of Manhattan's prime real estate. "Mrs. Sullivan?" A young associate approached with a tablet. "The Anderson Industries board members have all arrived. They're discussing the morning's stock report." I nodded, picturing the scene. The company's stock had dropped another 15% today. By tomorrow, it would be in free fall. "It's time," I said, straightening my designer dress. "Valentino, bought with my own money, as always. Let's go say hello to the family." Victoria saw me coming. I watched the color drain from her face as I descended the grand staircase, Amanda 2 steps behind me with her ever-present portfolio. The whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire, the first time I'd appeared in public since the Christmas dinner incident. "Catherine," Victoria managed, her social mask firmly in place. "I'm surprised you'd show your face here." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied smoothly. "After all, I have some announcements of my own to make." Before she could respond, George Anderson burst through the crowd, his face mottled with rage. "You," he sputtered. "What have you done to our accounts?" Heads turned. The great George Anderson, losing his composure in public? Unheard of. "I haven't done anything illegal, if that's what you're asking," I said calmly. "I simply consolidated my holdings. Would you like me to explain exactly how much of your family's debt I now own?" Victoria grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging in. "This is not the time or place." "Actually," I cut her off, "this is exactly the time and place." I raised my voice slightly. "In fact, I believe it's time for the evening's announcements. Shall we begin with your foundation's donation?" Victoria's face went from red to white. She'd spent the last week desperately trying to access funds that no longer existed, watching in horror as every financial door slammed shut. "Ladies and gentlemen," I called out, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom, "I'm afraid there's been a slight change to tonight's program. The Anderson Foundation will not be making its promised donation to the Children's Hospital." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Victoria's annual donation was a cornerstone of the city's charity season. However, I continued, Sullivan Enterprises will be stepping in with a donation of $50 million, 5 times the Anderson Foundation's planned contribution. Now the murmurs turned to gasps. Sullivan Enterprises, my company, had been operating in the shadows for years. Tonight, it would step into the light. Furthermore, I went on, I'm announcing a complete restructuring of Anderson Industries, following the SEC investigation that begins. I checked my watch. Now. Right on cue, federal agents entered the ballroom. George Anderson swayed on his feet as they approached him. "You see," I addressed the stunned crowd. "While the Andersons have been concerned about keeping up appearances, They've neglected to keep up with their legal obligations. The evidence of financial misconduct is quite extensive. You can't do this, Victoria whispered, but her voice shook. We're family. Family. I turned to her, letting years of suppressed anger surface. Like when you told everyone I was a gold digger? When you humiliated me at every opportunity? When you forced your son to choose between his dreams and your approval? Michael stepped forward. Catherine, please. Still can't take a side, Michael? I asked quietly. Still trying to play both sides? Let me make it simple for you. Your family's company is now mine. Your properties are mine. Your social standing? I gestured around the ballroom. That's gone too. Amanda began distributing documents to the board members present, proof of George's mismanagement, evidence of Victoria's misuse of foundation funds, and my plan to salvage what remained of the company. You're enjoying this, Victoria accused, her voice breaking. No, I corrected her. I'm finishing what you started. You wanted to see me as a gold digger? Fine. I just dug up every piece of gold you had and claimed it for myself. Legally, ethically, and completely. The next hour was a blur of activity. George Anderson was escorted out by federal agents. Victoria collapsed into a chair, her social empire crumbling around her. Board members huddled in corners, reading my proposal for the company's future. And Michael finally had to make a choice. I want a divorce, he said quietly, approaching me as the chaos swirled around us. Already prepared, I replied, nodding to Amanda, who handed him a folder. You'll find I'm being quite generous. More than your mother would have been in my position. He stared at me for a long moment. You never needed any of us, did you? No, I said simply. But I did love you once. Before I realized you'd never love anything more than your mother's approval. As the gala dissolved into scandal and speculation, I made my way to the podium. One final announcement to make. Ladies and gentlemen, I called out. While this evening has been eventful, let's not forget why we're here. The Children's Hospital project will proceed as planned under new management. And speaking of management, I paused, savoring the moment. Sullivan Enterprises is announcing its acquisition of the Anderson family's entire portfolio. Every property, every investment, every asset. I looked directly at Victoria as I continued. The Anderson name meant something once. It stood for innovation, vision, and integrity. Somewhere along the way, that legacy was lost to pride and prejudice. Today, that legacy ends. The crowd was utterly silent now, watching the fall of one of the city's great families and the rise of a new power. For those of you who knew me only as Michael Anderson's wife, allow me to properly introduce myself. I'm Catherine Sullivan, CEO of Sullivan Enterprises, and as of today, the owner of the largest real estate portfolio in Manhattan. I smiled, thinking of that first day I'd walked into the Anderson mansion, when Victoria had looked down her nose at my humble background. Oh, and Victoria, I added, almost as an afterthought, about your mortgage. I'm afraid I'll have to decline your request for an extension. You have 30 days to vacate the property. As I walked out of the ballroom, head held high, I heard Victoria's anguished cry behind me. 5 years of insults, accusations, and contempt had finally come full circle. Amanda fell into step beside me. The press is already calling it the takeover of the decade. No, I corrected her, stepping into my waiting car. They're calling it karma. The next morning, as I sat in my penthouse office reviewing the aftermath, a small package arrived. Inside was a familiar pair of pearl earrings, the ones Victoria had sneered at during Christmas dinner, along with a note from Michael. You wore these the day we met, He'd written, "I should have remembered that you've always paid your own way. I'm sorry I forgot who you really were." I placed the earrings in my desk drawer, a reminder of where I'd started and how far I'd come. Outside my window, the Manhattan skyline glittered. My skyline now, built not through marriage or inheritance, but through determination, intelligence, and the underestimated power of a woman they'd mistaken for a gold digger. Victoria had been right about one thing. I had struck gold, but not in the way she'd thought. I'd struck it through years of careful planning, strategic investment, and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to show them all exactly who they'd underestimated. The Anderson legacy was over. The Sullivan era had begun.